so much, and thanks so much for hosting this. I'm thrilled to be a part of this great Women's History Month event, and I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to celebrate Frances Harper and to work with my friend Sharia Benn and London acclaimed. So this is very exciting. I couldn't help but think last night as I was thinking about Frances Harper and our presentation today, and as Sharia and I were talking, we just received the news about the Atlanta shooting and the 8 Asian women that were shot in Atlanta. And most of us were horrified. All of us were horrified. Most of us probably weren't surprised because racial and gender violence have been with us for a long time. As we imagine our way forward, I think it's especially poignant that we are discussing Frances Harper today, because her life and legacy has much to offer as we think about our future and how we can be women, contemporary women today, who are advocating for the same human rights, civil rights, and dignity for each person that Frances Harper did when she was alive over 100 years ago. I actually first fell in love with Frances Harper about 13 years ago. I was invited to work on an article on race, gender, and the Bible in the work of Frances Harper. And at the same time I was working on this article, I remember this experience that I had with my son, Robbie, who's now 18 years old. He's African American. At the time he was 5. And he handed me a DVD, and the DVD was a movie, Hairspray. Now, I don't know if any of you all remember the movie Hairspray, but it's about this. It's about a woman and her daughter, a white woman and daughter, who are involved in advocating for integration in Baltimore. And I thought my son would lose interest in the movie Hairspray. I was working on the article at the very time that he was asked to see this DVD. For you younger folks, you can Google DVD to find out what those are. And so I thought he'd lose interest very quickly, but I was amazed at how quickly he was drawn into this story, and he was just glued to the TV. It's a movie that takes place in 1960s Baltimore. And he didn't look up from the TV for a while until they pulled out their signs that said integration and segregation. And at that moment, Robbie looked up to ask me a question. And it was, what does that sign say? His reading skills were not quite that advanced at that point. And so I told him that they said integration and segregation. And of course, we had to stop the DVD at that point to have that conversation. I think it's really interesting how differently you can see a film or read a text when there's someone not like you watching it with you and taking it in. All of a sudden, you see everything differently, which was true of that film, and it's been true a lot of my life with my children from Kenya, actually. So at the sign, when he asked about the sign segregation, it was a very complex question for me to think about. I'm a white mother of a Black Kenyan child, and I explained that there used to be laws, policies, customs, and beliefs that kept Black people and white people apart. And without a word, he just threw his arms around me when I explained that, and he held me really tightly for a few moments, and he seemed to be assuring both of us of the certainty that we did belong to each other. I reminded Robbie of the people we knew of, past and present, who had struggled for justice. I tried to introduce him to Frances Harper at that minute, although he was more interested in the movie, I have to admit. But without missing a beat, Robbie asked me, what does justice mean? Because that was part of my answer. And he said, does it mean love? And steeped in the work of Frances Harper at that point, I thought, yes, it does. That's exactly how Frances Harper would answer this question. Because Frances Harper, who was a native of Baltimore herself, would put justice as very much a part of loving oneself, loving God, and loving others. And she could never think about justice apart from that. This understanding of justice is reflected in Harper's countless publications. As a public writer and activist for over 50 years, Harper's work reflects a lifelong commitment to inclusive freedom and citizenship for all people. What a proud moment it was, an exciting moment for me to be involved with this monument that was erected in August, dedicated to African Americans of the old 8th Ward. And it was, if you don't know about the monument, you can see the picture here. It's on the Capitol lawn, and it was under the leadership of Linwood Sloan and many community leaders and activists that were able to pull this off. And the monument is called The Gathering at the Crossroads, Such a Time as This. On the monument, as you can see, it includes the life-size figures of 4 important African-American orators gathered around a pedestal featuring the names of 100 African-American residents of Harrisburg historic 8th Ward. One of those orators is abolitionist, suffragist, and civil rights activist Frances Harper, as you can see, the only woman on the figure on the monument. And it depicts Harper handing the 15th Amendment to abolitionist and civil rights activist William Howard Day. The 15th Amendment gave African-American men the right to vote in Pennsylvania. The 15th Amendment was a reinstatement of a right to vote. It was a federal amendment, but it gave, in Pennsylvania, this was a reinstatement of a right that had belonged to Black men in Pennsylvania before the 1838 revision of the original Constitution, which inserted the word white in front of men. This depiction of Harper handing the 15th Amendment to Day represents her expectations that Day and others would continue advocating for the rights of women to vote, that the struggle was not yet over. I was thrilled to know that now people passing that monument on 4th and Walnut would now be aware of Harper's work as an abolitionist and a civil rights activist, and hopefully interested in learning more about Harper, the journalist, the poet, the orator, the biblical scholar, the theologian, and the organizers, because Harper was truly the Renaissance woman. The truth is that until a few decades ago, Frances Harper wasn't very well known at all. Not even in literary circles was she well known, even though she had published dozens of volumes of poetry, 4 novels, and countless publications that were widely read by Black and white audiences during her lifetime. Contemporary society, 20th century American literary circles did not know her work, and she wasn't included in much of our thinking about the canon. But African-American scholars like Frances Smith Foster and Mary Emma Graham are responsible for restoring her to the literary canon a few decades ago, which is really an act of love. They very devotedly recovered her work and published and made sure that she was part of our literary canon. And now she is involved in many of our American literature anthologies. This historic neglect of Harper can be attributed to her position as both an African-American and a woman. Many African-American women writers have experienced the same sort of exclusion. As a woman, she was often excluded from the male-dominated African-American intellectual community. And as a suffragist, Harper experienced the same kind of exclusion from the white women suffragists, who insisted that securing the vote for women was a more important and strategic voice in the struggle than the vote for Black men. As is often true today, white women activists assumed the concerns of white and Black women were the same. Harper didn't hesitate to remind the white suffragists that this was not the case. Her determination to promote the rights of Black men as well as women vexed many of her white colleagues. And sadly, ultimately, Harper, a key player in the struggle for women's rights, was erased from Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony's History of Women's Suffrage. Harper scholar Melba Joyce Boards attributes Harper's absence from the literary canon to race, gender, and her strong religious sensibility that the literary elite of the early 20th century found out of fashion. Harper's writing, Boyd explained, I love this quote, seeks to construct an alternative culture emanating from a spiritual vision. And this alternative culture very much describes Harper's work, especially after emancipation. On May 20th, 1893, Frances Harper spoke on women's political future at the World's Congress of Representative Women. In the 15th century, this is her quote, in the 15th century, if the 15th century discovered America to the old world, the 19th century is discovering women to herself. Not the opportunity of discovering new worlds, but that of filling this old world with fairer and higher aims than the greed of gold and the lust of power is hers. Through weary, wasting years men have destroyed, dashed in pieces, and overthrown. But today, we stand on the threshold of woman's era, and women's work is grandly constructive. Much like Toni Morrison, Alice Walker, Maya Angelou, and many of the African-American women writers and artists of the late 20th century, Harper embraces what scholar Judilyn Ryan calls a paradigm of growth, an ethos of interconnectedness. Unlike the Black intellectual community and white women suffragists that excluded her, Harper differentiates power and privilege by defining power both as coercive, oppressive, and as creative, righteous agency. So she understands simultaneously, yes, power is oppressive and coercive, but also power is creative, righteous agency. And I think it is this grandly constructive impulse, this pursuit of love and justice, that makes Harper's life work so endearing and so important for us to pass on to each new generation.
Black women made movements run smooth, like MJ, like waterfalls, like TLC, we crept up on y'all. We were the tender, crisp voices that marched, rang, sang in the Birmingham churches, where we were best known for putting our twang on those chicken wings. However, Black women have always been here, have always been working in the shadows, never on the front lines, never in the floodlights or in the headlines, pushed aside to the sidelines, pushed to the back of the bus. I feel so alone in this struggle, always being pushed to the back, pushed to be quiet. Has it always been this way? Will it always be this way?
Hush. Somebody's calling my name. Oh, my Lord. Oh, my Lord. What shall I do? Hush. Hush. Well, the attempt to silence me, to make me accept an unacceptable state of invisibility and diminished value started from the moment I was born. Hush, little baby, don't say a word. Papa's gonna... No, my papa's going to act as though I don't exist. And hush, little baby, don't you cry. Mama's gonna sing you a lullaby. No songs, but I remember the tears. Were they her tears or mine? I don't recall. I was so young, too young to be an orphan. My father gone away before I was born. So I'm told. Something about a family secret or the mixing of race or class I never fully knew. What I fully understood was he was gone before the shame took hold, the shame associated with me. My mother, dead before I was 3, gone before she could redeem me from the shame of being me. I worked my shame out by writing, with a hope that I would shed light on the sins committed under the cover of darkness caused by man's inhumanity to man or woman. I wrote the contrast. They scorned her for her sinning, spoke harshly of her fall, nor lent the hand of mercy to break her hated thrall. The dews of meek repentance stood in her downcast eye. Would no one heed her anguish? All pass her coldly by. From the cold averted glances of each reproachful eye, she turned aside heartbroken and laid her down to die. And where was he who sullied her once unspotted name, who lured her from life's brightness to agony and shame, who left her on life's billows, a wrecked and ruined thing, who brought the winter of despair upon hope's blooming spring? Through the halls of wealth and fashion, in gaiety and pride, he was leading to the altar a fair and a lovely bride. None scorned him for his sinning, few saw it through his gold. His crimes were only foibles, and these were gently told. Hush, somebody's calling my name. I love my name. Names mean something. My family called me Few, a nickname derived from my initials of my given name, Frances Ellen Watkins. Born free on September the 24th, 1825, just south of that Mason-Dixon line in Baltimore, Maryland. My name, somebody's calling my name. Oh my Lord, what shall I do? What shall I do? Young miss, what is your name? You know they can't silence you if you know your name and your purpose.
They call me London.
Well, what do you call yourself? And what do you do? You've channeled me from the past into your present, so I'd like to help you lay claim to your future. But to do so, I must really get to know you.
I'm a student as of now. Not much else.
A student. You know, I recall my chair was near the window in my Uncle William's school. He adopted me and raised me from the age of 3 after my mother died. His school was on Sharp Street in Baltimore, close to the harbor docks. And on a hot summer days with the windows open, I could hear the faint rattle of heavy chains. And I could smell the distinct stench of precious lives being bartered and sold. And I sharply felt the pain from the terror of mothers and fathers and sisters and brothers being torn from one another. In that classroom, by that window, I completed my studies. And at the age of 13, with all my learning, I was top of the class. I was the best. But even with all of that, this, wait a minute, I'll show you. This was the best an intelligent, educated, socially cultured, colored woman could do. Do you know what this is? It's a broom. The best I could do was to become a domestic servant. But I was blessed because the Quaker family I worked for owned a bookstore, and they encouraged and supported my love of words. So during the day, I would clean And so, but in the evening, I would read through all of those books, and then I would write. I would write words, and words turned into sentences, sentences turned into stanzas, stanzas turned into pages, pages turned into books. I wrote in rhyme and rhythm. All of this gave birth to my first published book when I was on the eve of turning 20 years old. It's entitled Forest Leaves. Oh, that was in 1845. Even then, I was establishing my voice as a champion for social reform and equality. I wrote, learning to read. Very soon, the Yankee teachers came down and set up school. But oh, how the Rebs did hate it. It was again their rule. Our masters always tried to hide book learning from our eyes. Knowledge didn't agree with slavery. 'Twould make us all too wise. So I got a pair of glasses and straight to work I went and never stopped till I could read the hymns and testament. Then I got a little cabin, a place to call my own, and I felt independent as the queen upon her throne. Good learning, young lady, takes a lifetime. It is invaluable. So you see, being a student, a learner is very much. So, what else do you call yourself? What else do you do?
Well, I'm a poet like you. I write. Words turn into stanzas, stanzas turn into poems, but they're just words. To be honest, because of my age, my color, my gender, people don't really see or hear me fully. I am not valued at all. We were 3/5, always compromising for someone else's benefit. Never got to speak, never got a say or a seat at the table, but we got the 13th, so now we're 13. 13% of the population, 50% of the crime rate. Half of the issues that affect us are not our fault. There's a lot of division in our systems, but there's a lot of division in the system. But how the pie was never divided in our favor, how some kids weren't even taught pi square, how most kids hate math, but we invented it. Hate math because it will never be relevant. But if 400 years divided by 46 million slaves equals over 42 million Blacks with deep-rooted trauma, then why are we the ones to always forced to face inequality, more like everyday reality, that is, what used to be our everyday reality for centuries, which seems to be so long ago that no one else remembers? Or do they choose to forget? Are we the forgotten ones, called unpatriotic, but we fought in wars we never started, more like the rotten ones, called un-American, but we trying to start revolutions again, and ain't that what y'all did? As we hang onto this country's flagpole by a nylon-colored noose that's been decorated like a string, and maybe we are the scribes, a black blotch painted on a bed of white lies, and ain't we good farmers? Or are we really the stripes? Yet these look more like prison bars from the inside, and ain't that where you keep our fathers? Because in our lives always on the line, don't we always have to walk the line like a sobriety test type rope, always being pulled over and pushed down and pulled underwater, knowing we can't swim, knowing when we surface, still try to sink us? Never heard a black man ray, but y'all still try to sting us? Like your hands after a tug of war, this is still a tug of war. This is an internal war. This is an eternal war that might make the public go crazy inward like we're in a ward, but being a decent human being won't earn you no award. So when will it end? Because if third time's the charm and third place is always last, then what are we?
Young lady, we are no longer 3/5 human. We are no longer enslaved, no longer screaming, through the pain of our physical chains and shackles. It was those screams that led me to write some of my most acclaimed work. Like you are writing. Those screams inspired me, and I wrote The Slave Mother. Heard you that shriek? It rose so wildly on the air. It seemed as if a burdened heart was breaking in despair. Saw you those hands so sadly clasped, the bowed and feeble head, the shuddering of that fragile form, that look of grief and dread? Saw you that sad, imploring eye, its every glance was pain, as if a storm of agony were sweeping through the brain. She is a mother, pale with fear, and her boy clings to her side, and in her kirtle vainly tries his trembling form to hide. He is not hers, although she bore for him a mother's pain. He is not hers, although her blood is coursing through his veins. He is not hers, for cruel hands may rudely tear apart the only wreath of household love that binds her breaking heart. They tear him from her circling arms, her last and fond embrace. Oh, nevermore may her eyes gaze on his mournful face. No marvel then, these bitter shrieks disturb the listening air. She is a mother, and her heart is breaking in despair. My dear, like me, you have been called to be the voice for those who have none. Your power is in your word. And a word. I wrote on that too. Only a word, a friendly word, tender, kind, and true. A fainting heart drank in the word as flowers absorb the dew. Only a word, a faithful word. Feet that had gone astray were pointed from the tread of death unto the narrow way. A tender, loving, earnest word, sown mid prayers and tears, may bloom in time and fruitage throughout eternal years. Young lady, your words may ring forever, like mine, perhaps. Hush, somebody's calling my name. Oh, my Lord, oh, my Lord, what shall I do? Well, I accepted my calling, and when I was young, so I just buckled down in my studies, and I was the model student. I fell in love with words, not boys. And Latin. Oh, Latin, those sounds, the words, fidem meo obligo, vexillo civitatium, fe deritarum et rei publicae, pro quas stat uni nationi Deo ducente cum libertate justidiaque omnibus. For liberty and justice for all. Those words in Latin would become your pledge of allegiance. Oh, justice for all, a fight that I would take on with words as my weapon. People in time tried hard to silence me. I was silenced by the passing of time. As my first publication, that Far Sleeves, well, it was not found in your libraries or your electric information devices that you are always attached to. those devices that I believe you kindle a fire to read, or you go into your nooks to retrieve your words and read. You all have such strange customs, but I encourage you to go ahead and take out your device and gaggle me. You won't find me. Gaggle me.
Google.
Google. Oh, yes, Google. Go ahead and Google forest leaves. It breaks my heart that it went missing and lost for over 150 years. But a few years ago, one copy was found, and now it is tucked away in the archives in Maryland. My first published words went missing, but nothing could silence my cry for justice and equality. 5 years after publishing Forest Leaves, the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 became law. Now, this act, it was a group of laws intended to hush up the Southerners' call for secession. Maryland, being a slave state, was not a place for a free colored person. I realized that as free as my family and I were given at any moment, we could be kidnapped and sold into bondage without a trace. So my Uncle William and the family, they moved to Canada, but I didn't go because I had just been offered my dream to become the first female teacher at Union Seminary in Columbus, Ohio. Oh, well, you know it today as Wilberforce University.
I've actually never heard of it.
Or me, I suppose, until now. Well, I've come to help you look beyond what your history books have taught you, or more or less what they haven't taught you. Like not using the term runaway. Rather, use freedom seeker. I hate the term runaway. It implies that we did something wrong, and we were not slaves. We were enslaved. It was not who we were. It was what was done to us. Well, shortly after this law was passed, I knew firsthand of a free man who had returned to Maryland. He lost his freedom, and that poor man died from exposure and abuse. And upon that man's grave, I pledged myself to the anti-slavery cause and began writing even more passionately and in earnest, and wrote one of my most published works. This one has survived time. Bury me in a free land. Make me a grave wherever you will, in a lowly plain or on top of a hill. Make it among earth's humblest of graves, but not in a land where men are slaves. I could not rest if around my grave I heard the steps of a trembling slave. His shadow above my silent tomb would make it a place of fearful gloom. I could not rest if I heard the tread of a coffle gang to the shambles led, and the mother's shriek of wild despair rise like a curse on the trembling air. I could not sleep if I saw the lash drinking her blood at each fearful gash, and I saw her babes torn from her breast like trembling doves from their parent nest. I'd shudder and start if I heard the bay of bloodhounds seizing their human prey, and I heard the captive plead in vain as they bound him afresh in galling chain. If I saw young girls from their mother's arms, bartered and sold for their youthful charms, my eye would flash with a mournful flame, my death-pale cheek grow red with shame. I would sleep, dear friend, where bloated might can rob no man of his dearest right. My rest shall be calm in any grave, where none can call his brother a slave. I ask no monument high and proud to arrest the gaze of passers-by. All that my yearning spirit craves is bury me not in a land of slaves. With this pledge, I moved to Philadelphia, and I joined the work of the Underground Railroad. God, I was blessed, and I loved working side by side with William Still. I was appointed a permanent lecturer for the Anti-Slavery Society of Maine, and I traveled all over the country. I lectured against enslavement and racism right alongside with William Garrison. I'm sure you've heard of this one, Frederick Douglass, Lucretia Mott, and so many others. And my book, Poems on Miscellaneous Subjects, well, it sold more than 10,000 copies in its first 3 years after publication. And 20 editions were issued over the next 20 years. I was the first colored person to publish a short story entitled Two Authors. In my time, I was called the Bronze Muse. I amassed a fair amount of wealth, which I poured right back into the cause. But with all of my mighty work, I was still unworthy of human decency and respect in their eyes. This was evident on a Philadelphia trolley in 1858. Another attempt to silence me. Well, I was on that trolley and the conductor said, "Get out of that seat and move to the colored section." I refused and I screamed, "Murder!" The man said if I was Black, I ought to behave myself. Well, I knew that if he was white, he was not behaving himself. And it wouldn't be the last time. My dear sister in the struggle, who goes by the name of Moses, but you know her, it's Harriet Tubman. She was brutally beaten in October. It was 1865, and she was on a train going to her home in Auburn, New York. She was leaving Philadelphia. And the train conductor told her to get out of her seat. And for that, that conductor and 3 other men brutally beat her because she was Black, no other reason. Do you understand that more than 100 years before your Rosa Parks, people were already taking a stand for respect and equality by taking a seat? You see, like my dear friend John Brown, who was hanged after his resistance at Harper's Ferry. And, you know, we were waiting. I was waiting with his wife, Mary, at the home of Lucretia Mott for them to return his body to us. And while Mary was preparing his body, she found in his inner pocket a letter that I had smuggled into him. He died with my words next to his heart. Words matter. They mean something. You see, resistance can spark flames of change or war. So I ask again, my dear young lady, who?
I know. I called myself London, and I love my name and the woman who gave me my name. But most of all, I love America. Yet that doesn't mean that this country doesn't anger or disappoint or embarrass me when it continues to thrive on that same ugly hate you and so many others have experienced again and again.
Yes, yes.
A country built on war, preaching about peace. A country built on stealing and looting, preaching about charity, preaching about giving back, knowing what was taken from us. A country preaching about the past, but telling us to move on, preaching about united, but we have been broken for years, preaching about what is right and what is wrong, knowing what they did to us. A country built on hurt and violence and trauma, preaching about constitutional freedom and unconditional trust, while sawing off the hands of all the people who shook yours, they hoping that your word would finally mean something this time, but you always make it harder to learn the English language. When people are in chains, when people are dying in alleyways, when people are being beaten for using their First Amendment rights, begging for their lives, you do not have the right to be tired, America. You do not have the right to be tired of seeing it, hearing about it, or reading the articles. You do not have the right to be tired when the Black community is tired of seeing people who look just like them buried in the dirt. You want to talk about targets when you have painted a circle of blood on every Black person's back. You want to talk about unjust when we never see justice, even when it's in the courts. You want to talk about being afraid when we have lived in fear all of our lives, scared to drive down the street, scared to sleep in our homes, scared to wear a hoodie outside. You want to talk about sudden anger when this has been happening for decades. You just decided not to notice. You want to complain about the fires when our world was already burning, like the Amazon forest, like the bushes in Australia, like the hills in California. You cannot be surprised now when you poured the gasoline and gave us the matches.
Words, your words, my kindred sister. Wade in the water, wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. I troubled that water to get my brothers and sisters on that freedom train. I wrote and I spoke about the horrors inflicted on the enslaved. I went places in the deep South that I had vowed that I'd never go. I looked into the eyes of my enslaved and tortured kin, and I whispered, wade in the water. I got your ticket. The freedom train is here. Come get your freedom. But so many wouldn't wade. They wouldn't risk getting on board the freedom train. It was too much. It was so much to risk or lose. I understood about loss after I got married. Finally, at the age of 35. Then I birthed my daughter, Mary, at the ripe old age of 37. And by 39, I was a widow. And then the good old state of Ohio snatched my land, my house, my animals, and even our mattresses, because I was a Black woman. And when I was 40, the war between the North and South was over. So I went back to writing and speaking up for Black men to become citizens and women to vote and people to be equal, not just free.
Glory, glory, hallelujah.
Yeah.
Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His truth is marching on.
His truth, marching on. Well, it was May of 1866, and I was invited to address the 11th National Women's Rights Convention in New York City. I was seated on the platform with Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony. I must admit, I did shake things up a bit. Stepped to the podium. I feel that I am something of a novice upon this platform, born of a race whose inheritance has been outrage and wrong. And most of my life had been spent in battling against these wrongs. We are all bound up together in one great bundle of humanity, and society cannot trample on the weakest and feeblest of its members without receiving the curse in its own soul. Well, you tried that in the case of the Negro. You pressed him down for 2 centuries. Society cannot afford to neglect the enlightenment of any class of its members. At the South, the legislation of the country was in behalf of the rich slaveholders, while the poor white man was neglected. What is this consequence today? From that very class of neglected poor white men comes the man who stands today with his hand upon the helm of the nation. This grand and glorious revolution, which has commenced, will fail to reach its climax of success until throughout the length and breadth of the American Republic, the nation shall be so colorblind as to know no man by the color of his skin or the curl of his hair. It will then have no privileged class, trampling upon and outraging the unprivileged classes. I do not believe that giving the woman the ballot is immediately going to cure all the ills of life. And I do not believe that white women are dewdrops just exhaled from the skies. You white women speak here of rights. I speak of wrongs. The room was silent. 30 years passed from then, and I was still active in the struggle in 1892. Boy, I was 67. And I published Iola Leroy, or Shadows Uplifted. There was such a flurry around my book being one of the first published novels written by a Black woman. A few years later, at 71, all of my advocacy work led me to be the co-founder with Harriet Tubman and Ida B. Wells and many others of the National Colored Women. That was in July of 1896. And this started the whole Black Women's Club movement. Our motto was lifting as we climb. Lifting as we climb. Your historians crowned me the mother of African American literature. But you can't silence a queen any more than you can silence a king. I am few. Frances Ellen Watkins Harper. I refuse to be silenced. Well, on February the 20th, 1911, in Philadelphia, my earthly temple wore out, and they placed my shell in the same grave as my precious Mary, who I had outlived by 2 years. But I saw my dream come true. I asked no monument high and proud to arrest the gaze of passers-by. All that my yearning spirit craves is bury me not in the land of slaves. The Civil War abolished slavery, but civil rights will make us equals. And that is the ultimate freedom, right? Free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last. Are we? London. It's your fight and future now.
To be a brown girl means to be the strongest person in the room. To be a girl means to always have to smile even when you don't want to. To always have to laugh even when you don't find things funny. Always have to stand your ground even when they say you're wrong. To be a brown girl, you must be able to take a compliment. To say thank you, to be grateful, always have to make them feel as if they are doing you a favor by reminding you what you already know. To be a brown girl is to be walked over. To always have to work harder than everybody else, and yet you never get the credit, and you must be content with this. because you have to be ready for whatever punches the world may throw your way without skipping a beat, because that is what is expected of you. To be put together and never fall apart, to be powerful and yet fragile all at the same time. But to be a brown girl is, in fact, the strongest thing you can do, because no one knows what it is like to be that girl. No one understands the struggle of every day looking in the mirror and not feeling good enough, to be told you aren't beautiful, to be told that you will never be enough. But when you know they are wrong about you, you are greater. You are who you are now and what you dream to be later. You are more than just a body or a pretty face or the way you dress, more than the color of your skin, and nothing can stop you or take you away from your destiny. Whatever obstacle is in your way is just something to prepare you for the next one. It is just something that is going to make you stronger. Just something to prove to you that you are more capable of anything that you can imagine. So, go on. Prove them all wrong. Take a stand in your own truth. Take a stand in your own skin. Be who you want to be and what you want to be without the hesitation of someone else's thinking. Be a model. Be a firefighter. Be an architect or a beautician. Be a designer, be a technician or a plumber or a police officer and a scientist or a doctor and an engineer. Be a lawyer and an author or a singer and a dancer. Be an activist and a zoologist and a mother or not a mother at all, and be braver and be a dreamer and be happy and know that it's okay to not always be. Speak loudly and don't settle, and take up space and say no, and stop apologizing for saying no, and let your hair grow and cut it off and let it grow again, and wear a skirt and wear a suit and be a slob and be a boss and be the queen and the king of the castle. Be confident and be selfish and love yourself and be anything or anyone you feel like being. Be all of these things. Be a brown girl and be a brown woman, and know that it's okay to be that girl first before you become that woman. Be the strongest person in the room without having to trample over any of your sisters, because I'm looking at you now and I can see you're already doing it. You're already braver, already beautiful, already smart and kind and enough. You are already 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 enough. Hey, girl. Yes, you. You are already enough. So when you don't have to change being you for anyone, I think that's the strongest thing you can do. Thank you.
It is the strongest thing that you can do. Thank you.
London, 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 and Frances Sharia. Thank you, both of you. London, I just get chills when I hear you reading that poem and thinking about Frances Harper, because I know she heard you right now. And I just want you to carry her work forward and carry your life. I'm so grateful that you are continuing to enact and embody that love, justice, grandly constructive impulse of Frances Harper. Because I feel like 50 years from now, they're not going to be looking at the TV and seeing this shooting of 8 women, because people like you who have the same grandly constructive vision are going to be creating a better world. I've seen you do it already at age 17, and I know you will continue to lead and do it as you imagine a much better future and you bring it about. So thank you.
Thank you. Yes. Yes.
And Sharia, thank you for the way that you bring Frances' life and her words to just amazing You help us see the world through her eyes, and you help us think about how we can have those words settle in us and really envision a different way of being and striving for a more perfect union. Thanks. I love having those words that
Thank
you
you.
bring to us.
Thank you, Jean. And I, too, I am just thankful for the scholarship that you bring to people around Frances's work. And I discovered Frances about 10 years ago as part of what I thought was an acting gig, but it really turned out to be transformative, and just starting to read her work and found how relevant her work is for today, for today's. It was like she was just prophetic. And then to know her words and to hear contemporary activists and civil rights leaders, and I hear her words, her the cadence. I literally hear them verbatim sometimes in some of the speeches and works, but always that feeling that, and she was an incredible woman, incredible, incredible woman. I think any, woman that gives birth at the age of 37, it's still, she did not let her age stop her from her calling.
I don't know if we have time for, I do want to say one thing about her giving birth. Patricia Hill Collins has a word called mother work, and she uses that word to describe its biological, but also other mothers.
Mhm.
And it's work that nurtures and creates, and Patricia Hill Collins talks about this in terms of white women think about mothering in this biological, very individual way of thinking. But mother work, and I loved London's line, you don't have to be a mother. Mother work it's not limited to mothers. It's
Mhm.
the work of nurturing the world, of making sure that our world is still here 7 generations from now. And I think that I love seeing that really, Frances Harper just enacted that. Before there was such a term, she was doing mother work.
That, and you said that, and again, please, if anybody have questions, drop them in the chat, or come on so we can hear them. But Frances living that long without a biological birth and being as a strong woman of faith and a diligent student of the Bible. I can imagine part of her calling were reflected in the scripture that said, and the barren woman shall give birth to many, so, and that's what she did. Everywhere all of her work, of her life was about pouring into the humanity and believing in the basic goodness of mankind. She did not give up hope. And yeah, incredible woman.
For all of us.
So I see a question. Thank you, Ashley. And you can learn more about Frances Ellen Watkins Harper now on those Gaggle or Google devices. And I'm so impressed with contemporary historians and advocates and supporters and women really who are we just have this renaissance of Harper's work. So there's much more out there. And do I have any more performances as few coming up this spring? You all have inspired me. I kind of put Frances on a shelf thinking people would not, they'd be tired and don't want to hear about this woman, but there really has been a interest. So I'm going to try my best to do a couple of more, even if they happen to be virtually. But you can go to Sankofa Theater, HBG.com, and find out about Sankofa African American Theater Company, and also sign up for our mail list so that you can be kept informed of future productions.
But you might want to say something about the 26th, the last.
Yes. On the 26th, we Sankofa, in partnership with Gambit Theater and the Dauphin County Commissioners. Is that, no, the 26th? I'm getting it all confused.
Oh, I don't know.
That's the 29th.
Sorry.
We have a production, Do You Know Me? That, really kind of poetically explores and weaves together these same types of strong voices, advocates for equality, in a digital episode, we call it. And I'm so happy because so many young women, the high school women, young ladies, carried out my vision. And it's beautiful. Go to our website and get a ticket for the performance there. But we've got some other things. Jean and I have become fast friends around Frances, or deep connected friends around Frances Harper, and also Marian Dornell, who, I feel like was another spiritual word child of Frances Harper.
I just wanted to say thank you all very much. That was an incredible presentation. I'm still kind of, processing, choking back some tears a little bit. That was incredibly powerful. And I do want to say thank you very much, personally, from the bottom of my heart, and also from the standpoint of the library. This is such a valuable resource that we have now. And I'm very, very thankful for you all being here with us today. I do also want to be mindful of everybody's time this evening. So I want to give just a couple seconds if anybody has any final questions, any words of thanks to give to our presenters. They did an incredible job this evening.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And if there's anything else that the three of you would like to plug before we leave, please feel free to do so. Any work you have upcoming, any things that you would like to share with our library members here tonight.
I think we're good. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you so much for
You're
having me.
very welcome. Thank you all again, everyone, so much for being here tonight. Look forward to seeing you at any future library programs, and definitely please check out the Sankofa African American Theater downtown. Check out their website. Thank you again. I can't say thank you enough.
Emily, thank you so much.
Yeah, you're very welcome. With that, everyone have an excellent evening. We'll see you for our next library program.